It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast, presented, of course, by DraftKings. Ross Tucker, John Daigle with you, as always. Love those of you that have been checking us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Fantasy playoffs will be here before you know it. We're trying to make sure you guys are ready to roll. For those of you that are interested in making prop bets, in addition to listening to the Even Money podcast or watching it, John gives out some nuggets of information there as well. You can check him out on social media at NotJDaigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Big fan of what those guys are doing over at EstablishTheRun.com. John's day job, if you will, his full-time job. Just make sure you use the code FEAST when you check out EstablishTheRun.com. It's a very clever name for their site, by the way. I love it. All right. I also love, John, diving into these games. We did 6 in episode 1, and with 6 teams on a bye, that means we have 7 games to get to, starting with the Bucs and the Giants. The Giants are going to Tommy DeVito at quarterback. What does that mean, John?
And it sounds like Giants players are upset based on the communication that's going on behind the scenes, because everyone knows Daniel Jones was not benched so much for performance reasons as much as it is contractual reasons, since if he gets hurt and fails his physical next year, then the Giants would owe him $23 million guaranteed, as opposed to being able to get out of his contract this offseason, which is what I imagine they do, especially since we're trending towards Brian Daboll, for better or worse, having to find another job next season. But with Tommy DeVito back in our lives, I do think this is a good first matchup for him. Recall that the Bucs, before their bye, had allowed 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks they faced to score 23.8 fantasy points. The outlier in that stretch being Spencer Rattler, who was benched. Not only that, but the third highest completion rate and 8.4 yards per attempt in those 6 games before their bye. And if you don't think DeVito perhaps can still get it done through the air as a backup quarterback, the good news is, remember, we saw him make 5 full starts for the Giants last year, and he averaged 5.5 carries and 31 rushing yards in those starts. And Todd Bowles' defense for the Bucs against rushing quarterback this year, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson, all at least scored a rushing touchdown or reached 50 rushing yards. So I do think DeVito has a sneaky high floor for fantasy and can push the ball enough here to get us over the total in this game, despite it being a lower one. For the Giants as well, recall that it was not Devin Singletary's backfield before the bye. It was Tyrone Tracy with 100 yards and 2 of his last 3 games from the ground. Had that fumble in London on the very last play that ultimately cost the Giants the game. But we still are trusting him here out of the bye from DeVito, especially if we think they're going to look to run against the Bucs more to help DeVito in his first start in 2024. Everyone's concerned about Malik Neighbors as well. You're absolutely starting him as a wide receiver 2 or 3. But yes, if you had not sold high at this point, I am worried that these quarterbacks continuing to be under pressure for the Giants over the last month. Malik Neighbors averaging double-digit targets, but hasn't recorded 75 receiving yards in any game. And I think that's just because the inefficient targets he's getting. I am worried that it's not going to improve from DeVito so much as DeVito will respond as a super flex option for the rushing floor. So starting Neighbors, but yes, still on the lookout. And if your trade deadline has not happened in fantasy just yet, probably someone you want to sell high if he has a good game here. The Bucs are also returning with a new look offense, because no word yet, but I believe Mike Evans could play, especially because the Bucs are still very live to win the division. The Falcons could have cemented that deal, but I believe they let it slip in their past few games with losses. And because of that now, Evans certainly coming back. The Bucs only 2 games back from the division lead, and we only have 104 plays over the last 2 years where Evans has been on the field and Godwin off of it. But on those 104 plays, Evans has been targeted on 41% of the team's throws. They basically look nowhere else, unsurprisingly so, except Evans. So if Evans plays this game, very excited to get him back in our fantasy lineups. Also, looking at Bucky Irving and Rachaad White here. Remember, before in their last game before the bye, Sean Tucker, who looked great in his interim start for Rachaad White, has basically just been obsolete, removed from the offense altogether. And it's Bucky Irving who has outcarried Rachaad White in 3 consecutive games since White returned from injury. The Giants allowing a top 5 rate of yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. So Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, 2 players I'm also excited about in this game.
I'm excited for your value pick, John. Every week you have a value pick presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Little birdie told me your value pick is in this Cowboys-Commanders game.
And I think my value pick is going to shock some people because Jaden Daniels has not been the same player over the last month through that rib injury. We discussed this last week in the perfect storm through the injury and against a ferocious Eagles defense. And now over his last 4 games, just a 59.5% completion rate for Jaden Daniels. But again, I believe it's solely because of the rib injury. And now he gets 10 days rest and not even a professional defense, Ross. It's more like a Pop Warner defense for the Cowboys. So because of what they're allowing on that side of the ball, and if we believe Daniels is going to be at full strength, I think we go right back to the 76% completion rate and the explosive offense we saw under Cliff Kingsbury before Daniels suffered his rib injury. That's why he's my value pick in this game.
Love it. I would like to see him get back on track a little bit more than he had been. They insist there's nothing wrong with him injury-wise, but the numbers have not. If there's not, then I don't know if that makes it more concerning or less concerning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, teams are supposed to say the right things. I'm not sure I believe that, but I do believe in 10 days rest. I think that's going to help, especially at the later part of the season, immensely, especially because he didn't look necessarily bad. They also altered their offense, which is why I think it could look a little different this week. For instance, Austin Eckler, everyone saw him on Thursday night lead the team in targets. Not sure that happens again. I believe that was a game plan specific thing to get rid of the ball as quickly as possible to make sure Jaden didn't take any big hits. I don't mind still starting with 6 teams on bye Austin Eckler and hoping he remains involved in the passing game. He's looked amazing this year whenever he's had the opportunity. But with Brian Robinson still there against a Cowboys defense allowing the most points per game to opposing running backs, perhaps both of them get there. And even Jaden Daniels gets there on the ground. And that's why we just want to continue going back to all of these guys, Noah Brown even included. We have seen quietly, since he returned from injury, Noah Brown has operated as their primary number 2 receiver across from Terry McLaurin over Luke McCaffrey. Quietly, Noah Brown has out-targeted McLaurin in each of the last 3 games for Washington as well. If Daniels is at full strength, again, that's an if, but I believe he will be, and I believe this offense will just be back to what it was originally as one you cannot stop. And the Cowboys definitely cannot stop that in their current state. So yes, I love getting everyone, even Brown, involved in 12-team leagues. On the other side, I know Cooper Rush threw for over 350 yards in garbage time, but I really do think we're very close to seeing the end of that run and Trey Lance involved, if only to see something else. Because right now, it's not Cooper Rush's fault. It's everyone's fault. It's Jerry Jones' fault. But right now, they have no answers. Even in Micah Parsons' 6 starts this year, the Cowboys have allowed a league-high 8.5 yards per attempt. No player being out there has mattered so far for Dallas. CeeDee Lamb fell just short of 100 yards this past week on Monday Night Football. But again, that was less than 100 yards on 50-plus pass attempts for Cooper Rush. So it's just tough out there. They say they're going to get Brandon Cooks back following his knee surgery this week, but I don't even know what that means in this current state of the offense. So for me, it's strictly CeeDee Lamb, and that's a volume-based play especially given that in the last month before the Commanders took this extended rest, they were still creating pressure on a top 5 rate in the league. I'm very worried about the passing offense here for Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is at this point. What about the Broncos and the Raiders? You shouldn't be really worried about the Broncos pass offense. That was super impressive. Meanwhile, for the Raiders, Brock Bowers is a machine.
Yep.
Congratulations to everybody that got Brock Bowers on their teams for this year.
And I believe that was a purposeful season-high 37% target share for Brock Bowers, too. Before then, it was Jacoby Myers, who not only Gardner Minshew leaned on, but who was earning more targets than Bowers. I would like to think, though, that was more than just a 1 week 30+% blip on the radar, because we have a couple signals. It was both an offensive coordinator change and passing game coordinator change for the Raiders over their bye, and it's the post-rookie bye week bump. You get a couple extra weeks to learn the playbook, and then maybe you come out of that bye week with the coaches thinking we have to get this player more involved. And Bowers, obviously, has not only looked awesome all year, but looked awesome last week. It is a tough spot, but when you get double-digit targets, it doesn't matter. That's a player you start every week. At Establish the Run, we actually moved him in our rest of season top 150. We moved him up to the overall tight end 1 for the rest of the year over Travis Kelce. So if you have Bowers on your fantasy team, you absolutely love it. If you have the Raiders running game on your fantasy team, you absolutely do not love it, because Alexander Mattison and Zamir White both injured in this last game. So people could be forced to scramble to pad for bye weeks and injuries. And if so, I think the players you are going to just strictly to get touches in your lineup are Amir Abdullah and 6th-round rookie Dylan Labe. Amir Abdullah was the only available running back last week when both of the starters ahead of him got injured, and that's why he scored the 10-yard receiving touchdown and garbage time in the fourth quarter. But Amir Abdullah has not handled over 6 carries since Week 18 of the 2021 season. He's not an early down running back, and that's why if both Zamir and Madison are out, I go to Dylan Labe, the rookie, and Abdullah catching passes as the options just to replace them wherever you need that. Now let's get to the fun part, though, because we haven't even talked about Bo Nix yet and what the Sean Payton offense is doing. Definitely developing and progressing, getting better as the season goes along. But what really this offense has become is that Sean Payton said, okay, the strengths of Bo Nix are what he did in the Oregon offense in lots of screen plays, shallow passes underneath to get yards after the catch, and then get him on the move and allow him to throw deep. And they only ask him to do that 2 or 3 times per game. I would argue the first half of the season, he was not doing that well, but we've seen even this past week against the Falcons, a couple big throws downfield that maybe he wouldn't have hit in the first half, but he's developed so well under Payton. They're also getting everyone involved now. Marvin Mims, explosive wide receiver, has 3 carries in back-to-back games. Cortland Sutton now, a 25% target share in 4 consecutive games. Their rookie, Devon Vele, is being used as a possession receiver. They're getting multiple tight ends involved. Nate Atkins scored a receiving touchdown last week behind Lucas Kroll. So it's just a barrage of players. They'll throw at you, but Bo Nix is still the conductor of all of this, running what is a shallower passing game that they slowly open up when they trick the defense as the game progresses. So Bo Nix, he is available in a majority of waiver wires. I still believe he's closer to a QB1 streaming every single week as opposed to someone you should only play in matchups. This one, of course, an amazing matchup against this Raiders secondary that I'm excited to start Bo Nix against. And one more quick thought for the backfield. We talked about how Audric Estime, despite public consensus, did have a questionable ceiling, if only because of how Sean Payton deploys his running backs. And we got the rug pulled out from us last week. Estime went right back to only 6 carries in that game, 9 touches overall because he had 3 catches, but it was Javonte Williams who once again looked very explosive, 50 rushing yards and a touchdown, and out-carried Estime. So not trusting Estime, you can get Javonte Williams back into your lineups.
Interesting. Yeah, they've used a bunch of different running backs there. All right, what about the Niners and the Packers? What is going on with the Niners, John?
Still lots of red zone woes, and we thought Christian McCaffrey would help alleviate that issue since the Niners now bottom 5 in red zone scoring after being top 5 last year. But so far, Christian McCaffrey, it's not only that he's been somewhat inefficient between the tackles as a runner, still looks good in the passing game, but also George Kittle's absence certainly impacts matters. The 49ers rushing for under 4 yards per carry without George Kittle on the field this year, just because of what he opens up in that offense. The good news is, although the entire infrastructure is struggling, we're still seeing Jawan Jennings keep afloat as arguably a wide receiver 1, fringe wide receiver 1 for fantasy. Greg Olsen on the broadcast was calling him third and Jawan because that's who they go to whenever they have to move the sticks. 6'3", 215 pounds, was never used like this before Brandon Ayuk's injury as their X-receiver. But we're seeing that he can get open with ease and now creates a problem actually for the 49ers next year because they have so many players, including first-round rookie Ricky Pearsall. Jennings now in back-to-back games, 33% and 39% of the team's targets, which are CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, prime Devontae Adams. Those are those kind of target shares for receivers to earn that opportunity. So I would argue Jennings is the better player for fantasy than Deebo Samuel the rest of the way, just based on his rapport with Brock Purdy and how they're using him in that offense right now. The Packers, it's also still somewhat confusing because they use and have so many guys at their disposal. Even someone like Tucker Kraft, super athletic tight end, owns the South Dakota state record for power cleaning. He was such an elite athlete coming out of college. Even he led the Packers in routes run last week, but he comes away with an egg in the box score just because they have to get everyone else involved. The one person we did see get a bump in usage, though, out of the bye was Christian Watson. Because now in 3 games around the bye, Christian Watson has earned at least 19% of the Packers' targets. And we know when Christian Watson is at full health, he is a force to be reckoned with as a wide receiver 1/2 for fantasy football. And I would argue he's been at full strength the last 3 games as well since returning from his initial injury suffered earlier this year. So Watson is someone I am continuing to be very excited about even in this game.
All right. Yeah, he had a big game. All right, let's talk Kyler and Geno. I'm excited about this matchup. The Cardinals and the Seahawks, with what we've seen as of late from both these quarterbacks.
And the last 4 games for their bye, the Cardinals had really got it done on defense. 6.2 yards per attempt, 5th use in the league, with only 1 total passing touchdown allowed in that month. But it was also against a weaker schedule, and they were still league average in creating pressure. And that's how you deter Geno Smith, who is literally Jekyll and Hyde, even going back to last year, whether you can get him under pressure or not. Last week, if you go back and watch that game against the Niners, the Seahawks did absolutely nothing until Nick Bosa exited the game with an injury. And only then do they finally start moving the ball downfield because, again, Geno wasn't getting wrecked behind the line of scrimmage and that poor pass blocking offensive line. This year under pressure, Geno a league high 10 interceptions and 32 sacks. But when he's not under pressure, kept clean, the second best completion rate in the league. And so if the Cardinals aren't going to get pressure at you, I think we could see more points than Vegas perceives in this game because Geno will have an easier time throwing to who he trusts. Jackson Smith and Jigba with at least 20% of targets now in back-to-back games. DK Metcalf returns at full strength, does have a couple plays negated for penalty, but still looks good in the box score whenever Geno could finally get him the ball. So yes, I'm a little bit more excited about Seahawks passing game in this one than I think the public is considering them. And for Kyler in that offense, as you mentioned, it's week to week. It's hit or miss. We did see him get involved with his legs and with 2 rushing touchdowns against the Jets before the bye. And again, with the Seahawks allowing a top 5 rate of yards per carry, we don't just think it's going to be a good game for James Conner, who continues to be the engine of this offense, but perhaps Kyler can also be involved with his legs, and that's how they're going to provide points to push back against the Seahawks. So yes, even as a divisional game, I do think this could be a sneaky shootout here.
Ooh, that would be fun. I would love it. I would also love watching Eagles-Rams while I am flying back from Houston. I don't think I'm actually flying on Delta. I'm actually flying on Delta for this game. I don't think they have Labatt Blue Light, but it'd be a lot cooler if they did. I'll be drinking some Labatt Blue Lights with friends, living life to the power of we. Actually, not with friends. It'll just be with whoever's on the plane. Maybe
We're all
they'll
your
have it at
friends.
the airport. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
At any rate, always enjoy it responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Talk to me, John, about Rams Eagles. I guess I'm in particular interested about these Rams receivers who both had big games against the Patriots last week. Now they're going against the Eagles rookie corners who have been fantastic.
Whereas I said Seahawks Cardinals could be higher scoring than perceived, I think this game could be lower scoring than perceived, especially when you consider all the elite talent in it. And that's just because of what the Rams and Eagles have been on defense out of their buys. Since the Eagles, as you know, you watch every game, since they got Cooper DeJean back, it has been a complete mess for opposing offenses trying to move the ball against them. Even this past game, yes, Jaden Daniels throws that touchdown, but now in their last 6 games out of the bye, that's just 2 passing touchdowns total that the Eagles have allowed in their secondary. The targets, you mentioned their wide receivers between Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. That's just it. That's where the ball goes. Those 2 players saw 70% of Matthew Stafford's targets last week. Others get involved sporadically. Demarcus Robinson gets a deep shot here and there. But beyond that, it is all Puka and Cooper for all the right reasons. And so it's going to be an interesting chess match to see how the Eagles can stop those 2 guys in particular. And they do have the right cornerbacks in place to do so. It really comes down to getting Stafford under pressure, so we'll see what happens. On the other side of the ball, though, for the Eagles, although the Rams have been extremely amazing at getting to the quarterback over the last month around their bye, also 3 of the last 4 quarterbacks have scored 18 fantasy points and have had success against them. Jalen Hurts, we've seen him not only get it done through the air out of the bye, but in particular scoring a rushing touchdown, at least 1 now, in 5 consecutive games. He is, as you would expect, the diverse quarterback that can do it and get points on the board in a number of different ways. So despite the fact of being able to get pressure with Jared Verse and their edge rushers, I still think the Eagles have a leg up in this game, quite honestly, and the Rams just don't have the talent just yet in their secondary that's ready to handle this particular offense and A.J. Brown. So I do still like the Eagles in this condensed offense with Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Saquon Barkley to get the job done here.
Smirnoff knows there's no I in football. It's a we thing, an experience best enjoyed together with good drinks and good folks. There's a reason why Smirnoff's the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. This year, there are more opportunities to watch football and make delicious Smirnoff cocktails than ever before. Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Christmas, Smirnoff and the NFL are here with you every step of the way. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, we do game days. Last but not least, wow, the Har Bowl. This is going to be fun, man. I'm looking forward to it. It's the Ravens at the Chargers. Big game for a million different reasons. Both these teams, Ravens coming off that tough loss to the Steelers, and of course, the brotherly rivalry.
The Chargers game on Sunday night, we always worry that primetime games will let us down. Chargers-Bengals did not let us down. Everything you would ever want in a football game. And that was the first game. It was a litmus test for the Chargers defense to truly be tested all year, given that they had played such a weak schedule. And in that game, they allowed 350 yards and 3 touchdowns to Joe Burrow, a majority of it coming in the second half. That's why I think this game will be a shootout, just because, again, like Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson is just going to bring something at you that you have not seen all year long. Chargers also playing top 5 rate of zone coverage. Lamar Jackson leading the league in completion rate from zone coverage against zone coverage this year. And so I'm not expecting a letdown with egregious penalties and touchdowns called back as the Ravens did in that divisional matchup against the Steelers. I do think we get the Ravens offense that we've seen all year long back in this game between Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews and Derrick Henry. It's also interesting on the other side of the ball, though, too, because now multiple touchdowns and 21 fantasy points the Ravens have allowed to 5 of the last quarterbacks they faced before that divisional game against Russ, as we mentioned in the last episode, limiting him to 200 yards and 1 interception. That's not the Ravens secondary, and I don't think they've clicked just because they played Mike Tomlin in one game. Herbert has been on an absolute tear out of the bye, even getting involved for runs and carries concertedly these past 2 weeks as he continues to get further away from his low ankle sprain that he had in the first 4 games. We saw Jim Harbaugh also trust Herbert in that Sunday night game against the Bengals, where they could have iced the clock and run the ball to end it, but instead there were 2 possessions where they went 3 and out and killed less than 10 seconds because they just gave it to Herbert for 3 times and said, you go win the game. That's how much Harbaugh loves Herbert. He continues to lean on Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston and Will Dissly. Will Dissly now, by the way, since week 7, the tight end 11 in points per game. The target tree is getting a lot more condensed, which is great for fantasy and Justin Herbert in particular. So I love Herbert as arguably a top 6 quarterback for fantasy this week.
And I love when you crush it on both episodes, John. I am stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.